You want to make some picks on your favorite sports? Check out Underdog's Fantasy Pick'em game, where you can pick higher or lower on between 2 to 8 players and can win up to 325 times your entry by using code Niners when you sign up. And you'll get $1,000 bonus cash and a free pick.
From the alley-oops at Keysar to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way. From offseason to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. And the offseason is officially here for every team in the NFL. And it got off to a fevery pitch for the 49ers because, just like always, the San Francisco 49ers find themselves in the midst of the news. And there's a certain wide receiver, Deebo Samuel, that has requested a trade. And it was interesting because I didn't plan on doing any videos on Super Bowl. I just wanted to kind of enjoy the day overall and just kind of kick back and relax, and that's what I did. But 4:30 a.m., Ian Rappaport suggests that the 49ers are potentially in the market to shop Deebo Samuel around. Now, we get clarification later. Deebo talks to Adam Schefter, and we get the idea that he made a call during the exit meeting to tell Kyle Shanahan, hey, Kyle, we've been together for a while. I've loved this experience. But I'm going to want to part ways. I want to go a different direction. It's time for us to go a different direction. And it's interesting because the 49ers, I don't think, had any plans on moving on from Deebo Samuel this season. Just the way his contract works out, it doesn't appear that that was the method to the madness that they were going with. They were going to let that money that they had in void years kind of hit the cap over the next few years. But, of course, if you trade him, it accelerates. So I don't know if this was exactly what the 49ers were expecting. Maybe they were, talking to Deebo Samuel about some of the options that they could go with. But this was at the exit meetings, which means it happened right after the season. So a lot of times when that happens, there's a lot of emotions, a lot of things that play into it. But Deebo hasn't exactly backed off that thought process either. He was very much telling Adam Schefter that it was still a thing. And I'm sure that Myles Garrett coming out and publicly saying that he wanted a trade definitely motivated Deebo. But it's not a method that Deebo hasn't went to in the past. When he was negotiating his new contract after the 2021 season, during the 2022 offseason, he requested a trade. The 49ers did not facilitate that trade because they just felt like it wasn't the time. But they did end up signing him to a new contract a week into training camp, and then he's been a part of this football team since. Now, Matt Maiocco did ask John Lynch after the season, and this was after some of the exit interviews had happened, so we would assume that Deebo Samuel had already met with Kyle Shanahan, and they already knew about his intention to want a trade. And he was asked about Deebo. Hey, is Deebo going to be on this team? And here's what John Lynch had to say about Deebo Samuel.
With Deebo's situation?
Deebo's under contract. Yeah.
You expect him back?
Yeah. A good player and has done a ton for this organization. And, we're not in the business of letting good players out of here. So, yeah.
So, I mean, they're just not interested in letting good players go. He's under contract. I think that's pretty clear. So what do we know is that he's going to potentially have an opportunity, him and his agent, to find a trade partner out there. But there's going to be ramifications of what happens if Deebo exits. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode, how a Deebo exit would change the 49ers offseason. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Buckle in. We're going to go over a lot of different subjects, talk more Deebo, but talk about some of the things that could come from this. Some good, some bad. It's going to be fun. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you are going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. So we know that the 49ers know that Deebo Samuel has requested a trade, and they have granted his agent and Deebo the opportunity to seek a team to trade. But what does it take for Deebo Samuel to be traded? Well, first off, there are tremendous salary cap implications from this. Now, it's not like the money is going to, change dramatically for the 49ers as far as how much they pay out Deebo. They were always going to pay out this money, but when that money hits is going to change. If you trade Deebo now, before March 22nd, you're going to get a $15 million savings because that's when he has a player option that's going to hit. So March 22nd is a deadline if the 49ers want to move him to save that $15 million. I think that's one of the keys. I think if they get past that date, it's probably less likely that Deebo Samuel gets traded than if he's traded before March 22nd. That's also after free agency has started, so we might get a clear picture if maybe a team misses out on one of the wide receivers they wanted. Maybe they'd be willing to trade for Deebo Samuel. But what happens with that money, that there's going to be $31 million that would hit the cap for the 49ers in dead money. That would eat up a lot of their cap space that they have created with their rollover method, and then probably make them less likely to be active in free agency. It could hamper their building this season. Now, they could go through, work out some other contracts, figure out other ways to free up more money, which we already know they're planning on doing. An extension for Brock Purdy is still going to happen. Deebo Samuel's not going to affect that one way or the other. It just could affect the structure of the contract depending on when the money hits. You might want that money to hit next year if Deebo Samuel's money's accelerated this year. Also, George Kittle, he said during the Super Bowl media row that he was working on an extension, that his agents had been in contact with the 49ers and they were working on an extension. The structure of that extension could play into how they handle Deebo Samuel's accelerated money. Fred Warner has talked about his ability to restructure, and that's probably going to happen as well. With those contract extensions and restructures, if you had Deebo waiting till next year, you were going to have close to $70 million in cap space to either be able to sign free agents and really load up for a 2025 run, or to be able to roll over until next year when maybe you need more money. So Deebo Samuel's money is going to hit either way. It's just when is it going to hit? With a trade, it's going to hit in 2025, and a lot of it's going to hit in 2025, and then less in 26, 27, where you'll get your savings, where right now you would have your savings in 2025, and that money would hit in 2026 and 2027. But part of the reason that they like it hitting in 2026 is because that's when the cap is set to explode. They're supposed to take the restrictors off of the salary cap and allow the team's salary cap to go way up because of the COVID restrictions. So this could be a huge thing for the San Francisco 49ers, is just seeing what money gets hit where. And so it's very important for the 49ers to figure this thing out, and you have less money to spend now, but you would have more money to spend in 2026 and 2027. But I don't think, with the comments of Jed York over the weekend, or the way that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have been approaching the offseason in the last couple of years, or even with the additions of Robert Saleh and Gus Bradley and all these coaches, that they're thinking, oh, we'll just kind of punt 2025 and go to 2026. They want to win now. And I think Deebo Samuel could have a huge effect on whether they do that. So remember this when it comes to trading Deebo or moving on from Deebo. Salary cap implications are going to be the biggest obstacle for the San Francisco 49ers, because you are just going to have some of your salary cap eaten by potentially moving on from Deebo. So you have to figure out if that is worth it. Is it worth moving on from Deebo to get a compensation that you're comfortable with? Because that is the second part of this. There has to be a reasonable compensation. You don't just tell Deebo Samuel, hey, go get a trade, and somebody says, hey, Deebo's like, hey, I want to play for Washington, and they're offering a 5th round pick. Like, that's not reasonable compensation for Deebo Samuel. And you might ask why. Well, it's this simple. If Deebo Samuel left on the open market, if he was a free agent and he left, the amount of money that Deebo Samuel would get would likely fetch the 49ers a fourth-round comp pick. So I think it needs to be at least a fourth-round pick for Deebo Samuel to make it worthwhile. And I think the 49ers would probably want even more than that for a player that's had a huge impact on their team. You heard John Lynch say it. This is a guy that's been a really good 49er. And you're not in the business of letting good football players go, especially for nothing. So you're talking about a third-round pick, probably at worst, that the 49ers are going to be expecting in compensation. That is Deebo's job to go find. And also he has to find a team that's probably willing to sign him to a new deal. Now, his contract is easily tradable for the other team. A $17.5 million cap hit is nothing in today's NFL for a wide receiver with Deebo Samuel's set of skills. So I don't think a trade partner is going to be the problem as far as a team lining up to get Deebo. I think it's what the compensation is going to be and whether the 49ers are willing to run the risk of having that $31 million hit their cap this season, or if they'd rather wait until next year when that $36 million would hit, but you had a bigger salary cap and more time to plan for it to hit. I think that's one of the most important things to remember when it comes to Deebo. Now, trading Deebo Samuel could let you acquire another player, that's for sure, because you could pick up a draft pick that then you could subsequently use in the 2025 NFL draft to fill a big need. And if you're getting a third-round pick, right, you could potentially get an offensive lineman, a defensive tackle, potentially a safety, a guy like Andrew Makuba. Somebody like that could fit the 49ers' potential, future plans if you moved on from Deebo. But you're also going to have to figure out what you do with that compensation as far as upgrading other parts of your team. Could you take a third-round pick that you trade Deebo for and turn around and trade it for, use it as part of the compensation package to pick up a Myles Garrett? Absolutely. You could do that. So using a pick that you get from Deebo could work that way, especially if you're trying to send him to a good situation. But what about if you just use Deebo Samuel as part of a compensation package to pick up Myles Garrett? And I think this is what's been going through a lot of people's minds is, hey, why don't we just use Deebo in that package? Because the Cleveland Browns are a void of talent when it comes to wide receiver. They just don't have a lot of talent. They don't have a lot of playmakers. Right now, they don't even really have a quarterback. So getting something back in return could be huge for Cleveland because they have needs. And so, yeah, you could easily put that as a part of a package. Maybe you go the 11 pick, Deebo Samuel, and a next year second-round pick, and you get yourself a deal for Myles Garrett. I think that would make a little bit of sense. You would have to take on a huge salary cap hit from trading Deebo Samuel, but potentially if you're going that way. Now, it did get me thinking because we've been talking about Myles Garrett, but Bleacher Report kind of put out this idea, and it seemed a little far-fetched when it happened, but they had a Deebo Samuel package for a edge rusher. Now, it wasn't Myles Garrett, it was TJ Watt. But what they were thinking was Deebo Samuel, Jordan Mason, and 2 2s for TJ Watt. And that was I thought that was crazy. It didn't make a lot of sense. Why would the 49ers trade Deebo with all the salary cap money? But it appears that Bleacher Report may have put and outlined a potential structure for a trade that would make sense. And I'm not saying it would be TJ Watt, but couldn't you go with a similar type structure when talking to the Cleveland Browns? The Cleveland Browns don't want to trade Myles Garrett, but if they were getting a good haul in return, it could at least satisfy some of the fans and make it seem like it makes a little bit more sense as to why they would potentially move off the best defensive player in the NFL. I think that he's proven that he's at least one of the top 2, if not the best in the NFL. And you're going to have to get a package back that the fan base is going to approve of, but that you can use to help your football team. Kevin Stefanski's taking back over when it comes to play calling. He's going to need to get a quarterback that can run his system effectively, but one way to take pressure off a quarterback in an offensive line that hasn't been great is to get a player that you can get the ball to in space that's a game changer like Deebo Samuel. And why does this become more appealing with the ability to put Jordan Mason into this deal as well? Well, Nick Chubb just continues to get hurt. Unfortunately, every single year, he's just been dealing with injuries. And you need a consistent runner. And I think Jordan Mason proved in 2024 that he can rush for over 1,000 yards. He's a big physical type runner, which fits really nice in the AFC North. And so I think that would make a lot of sense for the 49ers. That would also allow them to keep pick 11 potentially with the way that this deal is structured. Deebo, Jordan Mason, 2-2s. You keep 11, and you're still able to get a really good player at 11, whether that's an offensive lineman or an interior defensive lineman. And so imagine the possibilities of what you could do with that pick at 11 and how that would affect your football team. Adding Myles Garrett and potentially a defensive tackle that's really good on the inside. And now you've revitalized that defensive line. Yeah, you lost weapons. You lost Deebo Samuel. You lost Jordan Mason. But you were going to lose Deebo Samuel next year. That is for sure. There was more than likely that he was going to move on in free agency, which would have been frustrating because you invested a lot in him. But that was just kind of the way the team was trending. You're also in a spot where you've got to make a decision on Jordan Mason. He's going to be a restricted free agent. You want to put a second-round tender on him and pay him $5 million. I don't know if the 49ers want to pay another running back $5 million and have the running back room have that much of an investment in it when you've got another very deep draft. You've got Isaac Guerendo that showed some potential last season, and you could go get some guys on the scrap heap, and the 49ers have proven that they can get guys that can go out and be able to perform. So putting a package together with Deebo and Jordan Mason might be very appealing to the Cleveland Browns as they try to revitalize that offense and get Kevin Stefanski some options for a new quarterback to be able to play with. So I think that is a possibility of an outline that makes sense. It went from being a crazy thought to potentially that. And it doesn't mean that it just works for Myles Garrett and Cleveland Browns. I mean, this situation, the Steelers don't have a quarterback either. They need to find a weapon to pair with Carl Pickens. And so this is a situation where you could potentially get somebody that fits. You've got Pickens that goes down the field. You got Deebo that can operate over the middle of the field and also be able to take some of these screens and stretch the field horizontally. That might help a new quarterback out as well. That's very appealing to have a playmaker like Deebo Samuel on your football team. I don't know if they'd be interested in Jordan Mason, but they probably would because Najee Harris is going to be a free agent. So I think Jordan Mason could plug right in, potentially step in, and you have a structure there. But I think it's less likely for the Pittsburgh Steelers to let go of TJ Watt than it is for the Cleveland Browns to let go of Myles Garrett. Number one, Myles Garrett has requested a trade and wants to move on from Cleveland to a contender. TJ Watt says he wants to stay in Pittsburgh. So there are different circumstances, but in both scenarios, it's almost the same thing. An edge rusher for Deebo, Jordan Mason in 2 seconds. Neither team has a quarterback. Both play in the AFC North. It's kind of interesting that they're in the same predicament, but it would make sense for the 49ers potentially to go do it. And I think if anything is clear from the recent playoff run in the Super Bowl is you need defensive line help to be able to make an impact and get after the quarterback if you want to be a really good football team in the NFL. The 49ers had this thought process and blueprint for a long time. 2019, they just weren't quite able to get it done, but that was the blueprint. Now they need to return to that blueprint, and it gets no bigger than potentially adding a guy like Myles Garrett to your football team. That takes the 49ers to a whole other level. And this is one of the things that's tough about a Deebo trade is then what do you do on the defensive line? You just invest completely in the draft. Is it Walter Nolan? Is it some of the other defensive tackles and later rounds, and you're just loading up on defensive tackles there? Do you still have the money to go out and get a DJ Jones or to get a Jaron Reed or potentially a Poona Ford? I think those are also question marks because you have to figure out how to kind of put that money around. Does a trade of Deebo Samuel affect your ability to be able to re-sign Drake Greenlaw for the season or to reach out to a free safety on the open market and be able to bring a veteran in, whether that's Hufanga or somebody else at safety? And I know Hufanga is not a free safety, but just bringing him back if you're not able to secure one of these other safeties. I think that it could complicate things. Also, what becomes apparent is the 49ers are going to need to address the wide receiver position. And you have to bring somebody in. And this was something that was interesting. A couple days before it became official that Deebo had requested a trade, there was the news that Davante Adams was willing to come back to the West Coast. In fact, the comment was he was intrigued by a return to the West Coast. And the 49ers were one of those teams mentioned. It was the Chargers, it was the Rams, and it was the 49ers. And of course, Davante Adams is from Palo Alto. He played at Fresno State. And, to the people that have known me for a long time, they know that I was all in on Davante Adams being the 49ers pick in the first round of that draft. Of course, he was not. The 49ers selected Jimmy Ward instead. And Jimmy Ward was a great player. But still, the 49ers had an opportunity to get Davante Adams. It didn't. But him being a Bay Area guy and coming back to San Francisco and playing here could be something that makes sense. And at the time, there was a lot of pushback on Twitter. People saying, hey, we don't need to address the wide receiver position. We're good. We've got Ayuk. We've got Deebo. We've got Jawan. We've got Pearsall. We've got Cowing. And I pushed back a little bit on that because my thought was, really, we're unsure about Brandon Ayuk. And Ayuk might be ready to go for training camp. He might be ready to go for the first part of the season. And that would be wonderful. That's what I want. We need Brandon Ayuk. But I think you have to plan just in case he's not. He had a significant knee injury that the 49ers have to be able to bridge the gap. Last year it was Dre Greenlaw they bridged the gap for, or Talanoa Hufanga they were bridging the gap for, potentially until those guys came back. And let's say for this talking point that Brandon Ayuk is not able to come back until week 5. What Brandon Ayuk are you getting at week 5? We just saw Brandon Ayuk miss training camp and really not get into a groove through 7 games before his injury. We would see like a momentary play, but he was dropping passes, not making the catches he normally makes, not getting open as much as we saw him do in the past. And it was a different Ayuk. So what Ayuk are you getting in week 5? We don't know. Does that mean that he would be the Ayuk we knew from 2023 in week 10 or week 15? We just don't know. You're hedging your bets on a potential that he's coming back and he's not going to miss a beat. And I don't think that's smart. But now it makes even more sense. The fact that Davante Adams mentioned the 49ers is now a lot more clear. Deebo Samuel had already asked for a trade. So somehow it has gotten to Davante Adams that this position was going to be open or could be open. And you might say, well, no, that doesn't have to be inferred. Well, literally the same day as Davante Adams was potentially going, or this claim was coming out about Davante Adams being interested in a return to the West Coast, the 49ers being mentioned, I heard from a source that I have, and I don't have, sources, but I have one because it's somebody from the backyard that I've literally coached before, but I have a connection with a friend. And he said Brandon Cooks was looking at the same teams, Chargers, Rams, 49ers. And I even said, that's interesting. I'd love to have Brandon Cooks. Doesn't really make sense, though, with the roster that we have, for Brandon to be able to get those reps that he ultimately wants. As him being a Stockton native, he wants to play in his backyard as well. But, if Brandon Ayuk's going to be there to go and you have Deebo and Jawan and Pearsall, where's he going to get enough snaps? I was thinking more of a veteran in a different area that added a little bit when it came to blocking, but not a big-time veteran like Davante Adams or a guy like Brandon Cooks, who's had multiple 1,000-yard receiving seasons. But that's 2 days before Ayuk. Now, 2 weeks or 2 days before Deebo Samuel. Now it makes sense. Now I'm like, shoot, no wonder those guys were saying that, because there's the potential that Deebo Samuel could be moving on from San Francisco. So there is an interest in players to get to the 49ers. Now, here's what the interesting part is as well, is one of the things that's been a topic of conversation all during the offseason has been separation on targets. And the 49ers were number 32 in the league when it came to separation on targets. And a lot of that is, I think, skewed a little bit with some of the conversation because We did get Brock Purdy kind of delivering the ball downfield a little bit more than he normally did, which are normally going to be tighter throws in coverage downfield. That's number one. It also doesn't measure times that guys are wide open and, they don't receive the football. So that's a little bit different as well. So I think that there is something to improve there. But think about the two guys I just talked about. And you might say that, both those guys, operate out of the slot pretty well too, but both of them are bona fide X receivers. They're bona fide separators. Devontae Adams, Brandon Cooks, that's what they do. And there's plenty of other guys I want to talk about in another episode. But the 49ers just became relevant when it came to the wide receiver market in free agency. Because if they end up trading Deebo, they're going to have somebody that could step in. And they might have to have two somebodies that could step in. Just because of the uncertainty when it comes to Brandon Ayuk. You need to make sure you can replace that production. And who do you replace it with? You replace it with a guy like Deebo? Well, there's no Deebo out there. There's nobody like that. There's nobody that can fulfill his role. So you change what you're looking for. McCaffrey can obviously handle some of the Deebo role, but now you move away from that and you transition your offense into a different style. And maybe you go to guys who can all win consistently, where it's not like, oh, I need a specific type of guy. I don't need, this guy's our deep threat. This guy is our slot guy. This guy is our intermediate and screen guy. And you go to players that can do it all. All these guys are route beaters. All these guys can win one-on-one matchups. All these guys make it more difficult. It's possibly the time for the 49ers to pivot. And there's always times in a franchise where you start pivoting. And I think the 49ers were planning on that pivot coming in 2026 when obviously Deebo Samuel would have been moving on in free agency, or they would have come to, they would have figured this thing out. But potentially adding guys like Devontae Adams or Brandon Cooks, you get guys that can win one-on-one and create separation on their own. Why was Ricky Pearsall brought here? He said because he can beat man coverage and win one-on-one. What does Brandon Ayuk do? He breaks coverage and wins one-on-one. So the method to it is maybe that's where they're going. Let's get a bunch of receivers that can win one-on-ones, so that way when they get matched up in those situations, as the league is trending towards more cover one and more one-on-one press coverage, let's get guys that can win. More X-receiver style guys. More Ayuk, Devontae Adams, Brandon Cooks, Ricky Pearsall kind of guys. And so, yeah, Deebo Samuel's a special player, and I think that he operated in this offense at such a high level. And I love Deebo, and I think that he still works in the 49ers system. I think there's a lot of things that Kyle would love to do with him. But I think there's also something to Kyle Shanahan talking about when they build a game plan for Deebo, and then Deebo gets hurt, and everything gets scrapped, and it makes it difficult for the offense to function the same way. Well, if you have a bunch of guys that do the same things at wide receiver, doesn't really change your game plan a lot, does it? Brandon Ayuk goes down and you put in a Jawan Jennings or a Ricky Pearsall. Maybe they don't do it at the level, but they could still do some of the things that he does. Then your game plan's not changing a lot. You could still attack the same way you wanted to attack. So I think there could be a little bit of a change in methodology. Maybe this was a team built for a different style of quarterback and a different team. I think Deebo Samuel was very relevant for a Jimmy G style of offense, right? Completely built on the yak, short throws, quick screens. I think it was even really relevant. I know a lot of people didn't think so, but for the Trey Lance offense, because Trey Lance was going to be running the football with read option, running a lot of jet sweeps, getting Deebo involved with quick screens, it made a lot of sense for that offense too. But maybe now Kyle Shanahan is seeing the evolution of defense, and now there needs to be an evolution of offense to get guys that can win all across the board. He knows his tight end can do it. He knows his running back can do it. And now he needs more wide receivers that can do it. And so this could be a interesting method to the madness as the 49ers try to figure out which wide receivers to get in free agency, because I do think they're now in the market for a free agent wide receiver. Whether that is somebody to step in for Brandon Ayuk until he's ready, or if that's someone just to complement this wide receiver core. But I think they need to bring someone in because you don't know what you're going to get from Jacob Cowing. And I don't think you can be bullish enough to be like, who cares? Let's play the guy, see what he's got. You need guys that can compete and can get some things done. And I like the signing of Isaiah Hodgins. I thought that was a good move. I think he's the Chris Conley replacement. Big body, physical, can help you on special teams, make some good catches. But I think free agency becomes a opportunity for the 49ers to address wide receiver and maybe the draft now too. They've met with a couple of Iowa State wide receivers. I'm sure they're going to take a look around, but it's interesting. So what do we know about this, how Deebo exit could affect the offseason? Well, financially, it could have a huge effect. It also could play in the 49ers' favor if they're able to land somebody like Myles Garrett with a structure of a contract or a structure of a deal that's Deebo, Jordan Mason, and picks, or even Deebo and picks for Myles Garrett. And so maybe that will help the 49ers. But we do know is right now, Deebo Samuel is looking for another home. I still think there's a possibility that the San Francisco 49ers tell him, you know what? You just haven't found the compensation out there. It doesn't make sense for us to take the financial hit and not get the compensation we deserve for you. So you're going to play out your contract in 2025. And how Deebo Samuel responds to that, I don't know. But the 49ers have every right to play hardball with Deebo Samuel. They have every right to make people play out their contracts. And financially, feasibility is just part of it. You don't want to end up being the New Orleans Saints, $54 million in the red because you just haven't been a good steward. And the 49ers have done that. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if this leads to more communication between Deebo and the team and they come to an agreement on him coming back, or if he's part of a deal to get traded before March 22nd, or a part of a bigger deal that lands the 49ers a big fish like Myles Garrett. And then the 49ers being in the market for a guy like Devontae Adams, Brandon Cooks, or others. And I'm going to talk about that in another video coming up. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.